Welcome, everybody, to the first episode of Who Shot You?
Conspiracy Theory Radio, where we look at facts and potentially some fiction by separating many of the stories that you've heard either on the streets or on television, or documentaries and movies relative to who shot many of the major rappers and celebrities that we still follow today. I was just looking at cable television, and I noticed that the Tupac movie has already made it to pay-per-view. And I know a lot of people are talking about the fact that it was a movie that was literally produced last year, made to theater this year, and made it to pay-per-view very rapidly. And I don't know if it was the quality of the movie or the fact that these are issues that are so intense that a lot of people are afraid to give us a bird's eye view of what's really going on
Yeah.
in terms of who was involved in that murder, how it occurred, and potentially who covered it up. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think there's also an awful lot of other murders that are ancillary to this. And so as we go through and look at those other murders, we get clues into this murder. And one of the murders is Orlando Anderson.
Very suspicious. I was mayor of Compton when Orlando was killed. From my understanding, he was brought in for questionings at the Compton police station, held until Las Vegas came, and they didn't want to question him. He was released, went down the street, and was murdered.
Yeah, he was murdered actually in 1998.
Very suspicious because if what the streets are saying is true, then he was murdered by other Crips. And that would definitely suggest that more than likely Suge had nothing to do with it.
Yeah. Well, I think we know Suge had nothing to do with it. Suge was in prison by the time Orlando was killed.
Yeah, but you can reach out from prison and kill someone. If you've ever been to prison, I have. I know that shots are called on the streets from prison liberally. What is suspicious would be in that time frame whether or not Suge had developed enough close ties and relationships with Crips that they would take that kind of a chance on such a high profile hit. Suge grew up in the mob. The mob is East Side Piru. And like the West Side Pirus truly don't affiliate too much with Crips. Now there's some overlay. Oftentimes Pirus grow up with Crips. They play on the same baseball team. They're on the same Pop Warner team. But once they are initiated into that gang life, while there are other bloods that sometimes have close relationships with Crips because of the proximity of their neighborhoods or because of the vast number of gang members that go to their schools, you see some crossover. But with Pirus, very little crossover. Very little crossover. So whether or not Suge Knight could have reached out and called a hit on Orlando, that's possible. But it seems to me that whoever hit Orlando was apprised with information about his whereabouts. And that requires some intel, some recon, and inside information at that. What do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting with Orlando that his he was being paid by Death Row Records. So you have Orlando that takes the beat down. Then Orlando comes back and testifies at Suge Knight's probation hearing. And then Orlando is killed a couple years later. I mean, isn't it? And he's being paid by Death Row Records. There's a file folder in the accounts payable of Death Row Records with Orlando Anderson's name on it.
Well, murder makes for strange bedfellows. It just seems to me, and I grew up in Compton most of my life, that the relationship between Luders Park, Cross Atlantic, Mob Pirus, Lime Hoods, Treetops, and most of the sets of Bloods that operate basically as East Sides. They don't do much business with Crips. Now that doesn't mean Death Row wasn't involved, but it probably limits the involvement of Suge in such a scenario. I think this might be far more notorious and could probably point to a non-gang entity. You know, a lot of times when I was mayor, I would have gang members tell me, hey, you know, the police did this shooting. They just said it was gang related, and that's how they clear it off the books. And of course, as the mayor at the time, I couldn't see that. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I mean, because in my capacity as mayor, I had 136 police officers that I dealt with on a daily basis, and most of them appeared to be outstanding human beings. There were a few occasions that questionable things did happen, but for the most part, most people don't envision the police to be contract hitters. But in order to shoot someone at a car wash, which is a limited experience, I mean, you're not going to be at the car wash all day long. You might be there 30 minutes. You would have to have some information that you probably couldn't obtain by just someone noticing he's there, and you go get a crew together in 30 minutes and you murder someone. It sounds like it's more of a plan. Some might even say a conspiracy. But for me, what I thought was most unusual was the fact that Crips were credited with the hit. Now, Crip gangs do fight Crip gangs, no doubt about it. But most of the time, West Side Crip gangs in Compton don't really have beef with East Side Crip gangs. They don't share the same territory. They don't have the same interests. They normally don't operate, even if they are operating in a pseudo drug cartel, their businesses don't conflict. Because nobody that's a Crip on the east side of Compton is going to try to sell dope on the west side. It's a super no-no, and it'll get you eliminated very fast. So it seems to me that someone that had higher than normal knowledge knew that he was going to be at that car wash, knew what time he was going to be at that car wash, and knew who he was going to be at that car wash with. And I say that because, from what I understand, nobody escaped. Everybody who was there and involved in that shooting died.
I think there might have been one person that they pinned everything on. And, you know, that's not uncommon. I think with Orlando Anderson, what's kind of interesting too is that he was sued by Afeni Shakur for a wrongful death of Tupac. And he countersued Afeni, and he won a settlement. And so that tells you right there, obviously, this is not the shooter of Tupac. If this actually went to court and he was able to win a settlement from Afeni Shakur, this is not the man that killed Tupac. And after that suit settled, when he was about to get the check, is when he gets killed.
Well, there's two things we got to keep in mind. First of all, I think Americans now know, and especially African Americans, that the court system is not as pristine as it is presented to be. At one point, we all believed that if it got to court, it would be adjudicated, and of course, the most justice-minded and honest-thinking people would be operating it. In my personal experience, what I have seen as a defendant, I know, and I can say without a shadow of a doubt, that oftentimes courts have their prejudices. Sometimes those prejudices are political. Sometimes they're economic. And that's sad. But yes, sometimes courthouses can be bought. And so we can't say because something happened in a court that it is that it's a clean transaction. What we can say is this: for someone who's accused of murder to countersue, and put themselves in great liability and jeopardy if indeed and in fact you are the assailant. It's a pretty bold move. You got to have a great degree of certainty that you don't have really any exposure to try to drag a lawsuit that could lead in your conviction out any longer than it has to be. I know that that particular area in Compton is not a stronghold for Southside Crips. I mean, it would be rare, very rare for a Southside Crip to be anywhere right around the corner from Compton High School. If you know anything about Compton, the layout of the city, the South Side is just about as far east as you can go in Compton. Most of the South Side is literally the county of Los Angeles. And then if it's true that Front Hood Crips were involved in the shooting, then it's even rarer for a Front Hood Crip to be at Compton High School, because you're talking about Crips who are predominantly either from Nutty Block, from Tragnew Park, or from a small, very well-to-do enclave that is, you know, kind of, it has a Crip gang, but they're not known for being very vicious, and I just leave their name out. But no one would go into that vicinity who was not from one of those three cliques to do anything. You know, Crips, Pyrus, they have what's known as books, code books. They operate under codes that are not written, but they're well known. And one of the codes that flows through every neighborhood is don't do violence in my neighborhood. Guys will say, hey, you got the hood hot. And if you're not from the hood and you got the hood hot, people will come looking for you. Because most of these gangs, they're doing other things. They're not just gangbangers. You know, they're bank robbers, dope dealers, car thieves, truck hijackers. And they literally like to operate in a quiet environment when they're doing things where they make money. So going into somebody else's neighborhood and bringing a very hot investigation to that neighborhood is frowned upon. In fact, if I'm from a particular neighborhood and I want to kill you, I want to commit murder against you, the last thing I'm going to do is do it in my neighborhood, because that automatically IDs me. It automatically says that someone from this hood is the perpetrator, because who from somewhere else would take the risk to pull off this crime? You'll have everybody looking for you if you go into another neighborhood and you do murder, especially if that neighborhood is not in on it. And if it's an economic crime, if it's for money, that'll really piss off a set or a clique or a gang. If you come into their neighborhood and you do what they call a doulo, you know, you do something wrong and you're doing it wrong, right?
Makes sense.
You can do wrong, and then where you do wrong can make it even worse.
Yeah.
Right? Because believe me, and I say this to people all the time, people take these gangs lightly. But I know a lot of gang members, and I know a lot of Crips. Many of them are my friends. And I can tell you that if a murder happens in a Crip or a Piru neighborhood, the Crips and Pyrus in that neighborhood are going to investigate it. And they're going to want to know every detail in case they have to make a decision. If they have to make a decision whether or not there's a retaliation, they want to make sure they get the right guy. They might even question a few folks that were involved before they make the ultimate decision. Unfortunately, with these gangs, oftentimes there's only one punishment. There can also be, punishments like, don't ever come back in our neighborhood again. You're okay until you come back. If you ever come back, you know what's going to happen. So that scenario there has always confused me, even when I was mayor.
So let's talk about Orlando at the MGM Hotel because Orlando is there. He gets in an altercation with Tupac. Trayvon whispers into Tupac's ear. Tupac rushes Orlando, and there's a little fight that happens, and he gets the bum rush. And then everybody flees the MGM, and Orlando is there getting interrogated, and it looks like Compton cops are there. Does that make sense to you?
Well, before we go there, let's talk about Tupac. I
Okay.
had the privilege of meeting Tupac, and he was not a gangbanger. Now, I don't care where he grew up. I don't care what his orientation was. He was not a gang member, because the average gang member, if he's in a hotel in Las Vegas, the first thing he's going to think is everything in this hotel is under surveillance. As I said, people highly underestimate the mindset of Crips and Pyrus. They're not stupid, okay? So if they saw an enemy in a casino, unless they are absolutely drunk or high, they're not going to hit you in there because they know you're caught.
Yeah, there's cameras
Eye in the
everywhere.
sky.
Yeah.
Security's everywhere. Every inch is under surveillance. So Tupac clearly didn't understand the nature of that game. Secondly, once he initiated violence, everybody who's with him now is initiated into that violence. Now that is gang mentality. That's hood mentality. If the homie goes, I gotta go. If the homie starts fighting, I gotta start fighting. So that set off a firestorm. Now, was that firestorm a plot? Highly probable. And here's why. You would have to know that Tupac is playing gangbanger and not really a gangbanger to whisper that into his ear and get a response from him. Because if you whisper to the average gangster from Compton, there goes so-and-so over there, and they're in a casino, they'll look at him and say, you know, something like, I'll catch up with you later. You know, see you around.
Because they're looking and they know.
They know.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, most of them have had experiences where they've been prosecuted, and they know what gets you a guilty verdict. Evidence. In video, it's a dead bang. So someone had to know that Tupac is really not a mob pyro. He might have mob on his chain, but there's certain orientations that go on in neighborhoods. Believe me, it starts when you're about 7th grade, and it goes on until the day you die. The double OGs are taught by the triple OGs, the OGs are taught by the double OGs, and the baby Gs are taught by them. So you know what you can and cannot get away with. If you do something stupid when you get back to the hood, they're going to tell you, that was stupid, you knew better than that. So it had to be whispered to Tupac. That's important. And if you're trying to set up a scenario where Tupac ultimately is blamed for his own demise, then that would be the person you would tell this to. Secondly, whoever hit him had a mentality that was reflective of either A, gang culture, or police culture. Here's why. Why didn't they shoot him in the hotel? Because of the same facts that I told you. If I shoot you anywhere near any of these hotels, right, I'm caught.
Yeah. Because eye in the sky, cameras everywhere.
Because Vegas is not concerned about murder. Vegas is concerned about money.
Yeah.
And anything that hurts their money, they're going to punish it. They're going to make an example out of it. So, whoever did the retaliation, if indeed it was a retaliation, I mean in the truest term, had to also be armed with facts. Facts that you would only know if you had inside information. You'd have to know routes. You'd have to know tendencies. You'd have to know who's going to sit where in the car. You have to know whose car it is, which is going to tell you who's driving the car. If it tells you who's driving the car, it tells you what side to come and attack on. Because most times, if the driver sees the shooter before the shooting starts, he can take evasive maneuvers. There are ways that you can get away. Second, we've seen enough video of Suge to know that if Suge thinks you're getting ready to harm him and he's in a car,
Absolutely.
he's going to take evasive maneuvers, and he's going to use the car as a what?
He's going to use it as a weapon.
He's going to use it as a weapon.
Yeah.
So these are facts that only people who are deeply buried inside of that particular scenario would know, understand, and act on. And so does that say the attack was suspicious? It may not be suspicious to a layperson, but if you've been living on the streets of a hood where shooting people in drive-bys or rolling up on people and shooting them while they're sitting in the car is something that happens a lot, then you know to attack the passenger side is to disarm the driver by what? Surprise.
Yeah.
Right? Secondly, even if the passenger sees it coming, what can he do? He doesn't have a steering wheel. He doesn't have a gas pedal. He doesn't have a brake. Okay? More importantly, whoever knew that they were going to carry this out knew exactly where the blind spots were, which means there had to be some pre-planning that took place over a period of a great length of time.
And so the odds of Orlando Anderson getting beat down, getting into a car, and going and finding Tupac and Suge.
Impossible.
Yeah. I mean, it's just not possible.
Impossible. First of all, if you take that kind of beating, it's a real beating, you're disoriented. You understand?
Yeah.
In 1980, I had the displeasure and misfortune of going into a liquor store of another hood. Of course, I was never gang active, but people knew I grew up in the West Side, so you're a West Side whether you want to be one or not. And the two gentlemen who were with me, they literally gave up on the fight very early, but I couldn't. So it was far less people attacking me than it was Orlando. Now, I was 235 pounds, bench pressing 400. I mean, I would work out with 300. Former football player, pretty tough guy, right? I was knocked out for about 3 or 4 hours. You understand what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
So either the assault was a fake or he couldn't retaliate, because you don't get beat by 12 or 13 people. Brush your clothes off and then go do something as well planned and nefarious as what we know took place in Las Vegas. So now you have to look at it from a total picture. And the total picture is, if this is either gang or police culture that's in operation, it's operating with higher than basic knowledge. Where the cameras are, who the driver is, what kind of car is it, what time is it, where the police going to be. Because you got to have escape routes. You got to move as far away from the police station as you can. And from what I understand, it was in the opposite direction of the police station.
So we were talking about Orlando Anderson and the situation in Las Vegas, and you were talking about how you were in a fight and you were disoriented.
Yeah, I was in a fight. I was jumped by some bounty hunters. Not Nickerson Gardens bounty hunters, Ujima Village bounty hunters. And I knew these guys. I mean, a lot of them went to Centennial with me. But once violence began against my buddies, the rule in the hood is I have to engage. If I don't, when I get back to the neighborhood, I'm going to have a problem. I can't leave them, and I can't watch it happen. That's just the way it is. But even when, and there was a lot of retaliation by the West Side Pyrus, even though I wasn't a member, against these guys, they didn't kill me. So the retaliation is most times measurable responses. If you don't kill me, we're not going to kill you. So that kind of a response over a gold chain, and then more importantly, that kind of response over what we call a beatdown in the hood, is a little overblown. You know, number one, Tupac at that point was the most well-known rapper in the world, bar none.
Yeah.
The most popular, well-known, and probably one of the best paid. So if you hit Tupac, you know you're going to have some problems. Two, what is this all about? Remember, I told you most of these gangs, they like to get down to the bottom of why something happened. Because they're not operating willy-nilly. They do want to have some sense of justice. And they're not just going to go out and kill anybody over an issue that is an offense that can be settled with a fist fight. Or you jump on us, we jump on you. Now, if the outcome was the assassination of Tupac and the attempted assassination of Suge, then anything that happened prior to that had no real basis for its purpose other than it would cover the outcome. Cover it. And are these street level guys wise enough to do that? Yes. But more importantly, people in law enforcement are wise enough to do it, because if someone in law enforcement is going to do something wrong, they know exactly what their colleagues are going to be looking for. Evidence. They're going to be looking for evidence that's going to come in the form of what? Motive, means,
Opportunity.
and opportunity.
Yeah.
So you tell me, who knew the opportunity would be created on a dark corner in a not so well attended area in Las Vegas? The perpetrator? Who would have the motive to kill Tupac, and do you really kill people behind a gold chain in a fight? Don't let television fool you. Gang members are not stupid. They operate with a code. They try to follow it as best they could, be they Crip or Pyru, because they're going to be judged by their actions in their neighborhood by what are known as shot callers. Now that's a big question. Was Orlando a shot caller? I was a mayor of Compton 10 years. And prior to that incident, I'd never heard of him. And believe me, I knew a lot of Crips. I knew them from, growing up. And mind you, these guys were younger than me. But I also would know which Crips were out there, handling their business, who the shooters were, who the shot callers were. And I'd never heard of them. Never.
And so, minutes after Tupac is shot, Orlando Anderson's name is being pushed around as he's the shooter of Tupac. Isn't that a little convenient? If he's never heard of, if the former mayor of Compton has never heard of Orlando Anderson before the Tupac shooting, how is it that David Kenner knows the name of Tupac and other people know the name, not the name of Tupac, the name of Orlando Anderson, and they are running around telling everybody that Orlando Anderson is the shooter?
He's a fall guy. He's a patsy. And much like the shooter of our former president, he's not going to live through it, because dead men tell no tales. And so something very, very important, I believe, is the base motivation for the assassination of Tupac Shakur. And I disagree with people who say, well, he wasn't important enough for his murder to be deemed an assassination. Yes, he was. I remember clearly in around 1994, I had a meeting with Eazy-E. That meeting was about his lyrics and the impact of his lyrics on black people. And for 9 hours, we met in my office. We talked about the legacy of Martin Luther King, the legacy of Malcolm X, and how African people have an oral tradition so that we tell our stories orally, and they have impact on our culture. And from that meeting, Eazy-E relented and told me I'll never make another record that disrespects African American women, that embraces violence as a means by which to solve problems. And believe me, he was dead in 9 months. Dead in 9 months. And if anyone doubts it, you can look at his funeral and you'll see me speaking above his body. And the reason why I was there, because I knew what a tragedy had occurred. Because he was ready to right the ship, to turn it around and use his voice for positive imagery. But unfortunately, he never got there. And Tupac, from what I understand, was at that same level of understanding of the power that he wielded through his voice. The time that I met him and shared a pretty lengthy conversation with him at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, he talked to me about, why did I feel so strongly about Eazy and rap music and how it can change the lives of people who are in a culture that's very impressionable. And he comprehended everything that I said about the oral tradition of African Americans, of art influencing life. And unfortunately, he never got a chance to make that change either. So that would bring in the possibility of an entirely larger entity involving itself in the operations of Death Row Records, in the success or failure of Death Row Records. But definitely, when you look at that homicide, and I've seen a lot of them, at one point Compton averaged about 98 homicides a year, and we only have about 85,000 people living here. So more than 1 in every 1,000 was going to get killed, and more than likely that murder was going to come across my desk. That murder was too specialized, too unique, too well scripted for it to come out of the mind of a Southside Crip. Just he would need too much information to carry that out, in my opinion, unless they had access to info and intel that most gangs don't have.
Well, we've been here with the former Mayor of Compton, Omar Bradley. This is Who Shot You? We're planning on doing this on a regular basis, and we're going to explore the murder of Tupac, the murder of Eazy-E, the murder of Biggie Smalls, and some of the ancillary murders that happened in the rap world. And we're looking forward to more episodes, and feel free to send us your questions.
We're right here in Compton, California, broadcasting live. And as you can tell, the ghetto bird is overhead. So you know we're authentic. This is Conspiracy Radio. This is Who Shot Ya? We'll see you next week.
Thank you.